When struggling cowboy Henry Stone discovers a family of 6, tied to railway tracks with a brutal sign reading "Not Worth Saving," he has 17 minutes before the morning train arrives to make a choice that will define not just their fate, but his own. Can a man society deemed worthless prove that everyone, including himself, deserves a chance at redemption? The sound of hooves hitting frozen ground echoed across the empty Wyoming land like a broken clock. Henry Stone pulled his coat tighter as the cold wind cut through him like a knife. It was early morning in 1879, and the sun barely showed through the gray clouds above. His horse, an old mare named Belle, breathed out white puffs of air as they rode toward the railroad tracks. Henry had been traveling for 3 days straight, heading to the town of Cheyenne to find work. His stomach felt empty, and his pockets held only a few coins that jingled sadly with each step Belle took. The prairie stretched out forever in every direction. Dead grass bent in the wind, and scattered cow bones told stories of hard winters and broken dreams. Henry had seen too many of those stories lately. His last job at a cattle ranch had ended badly when the owner said he wasn't worth the food he ate. Those words still stung like a fresh wound. Henry squinted ahead and saw something strange near the train tracks. At first, he thought it might be logs or supplies left by railroad workers, but as Belle carried him closer, his heart began to beat faster. Those weren't logs at all. People. 6 people tied to the metal rails. Henry jumped off Belle and ran toward them. A woman with messy brown hair struggled against thick ropes around her arms and legs. 4 children lay still beside her, their eyes wide with fear. An old man with a gray beard watched Henry approach, his face showing no surprise, only tired sadness. "Help us," the woman whispered, her voice rough from calling out for hours. "Please, the morning train comes soon." Henry pulled out his pocket watch. The hands showed 20 minutes before 7 o'clock. He had heard the trains whistle every morning for the past 3 days, at exactly 7. A wooden sign stuck up from the gravel next to the tied-up family. Black letters spelled out cruel words that made Henry's blood run cold. Not worth saving. Henry's hands shook as he started working on the ropes. Who would do such a terrible thing? And why did those words on the sign sound so familiar to the ones that had been following him his whole life? The ropes were tight and hard to untie. Someone had made sure these people couldn't get free on their own. Henry pulled out his small knife and began cutting, but the blade was dull and the work went slowly. "Who did this to you?" he asked, while sawing at the thick rope. The woman looked up at him, with eyes full of pain. "My husband," she said quietly. "He said we cost too much money to feed." Henry stopped cutting for a moment. A husband had tied his own family to train tracks? The thought made him sick to his stomach. But there was no time to think about it now. The distant sound of a train whistle floated across the morning air. Still far away, but getting closer. "What's your name?" Henry asked, as he freed the woman's hands, and she immediately started helping with the children's ropes. "Vivian O'Brien," she said, lifting the smallest child, a little girl with blonde curls. "This is my father-in-law, Seamus, and my children." The old man, Seamus, rubbed his wrists where the ropes had cut into his skin. "Bless you, son," he said to Henry. "I thought we were done for." Henry worked faster on the ropes, holding the oldest boy. The child looked about 12 years old and hadn't said a word yet. His eyes held the same tired look as his grandfather's, as if he had seen too much sadness for someone so young. "Can you walk?" Henry asked the boy, as the last rope fell away. The boy nodded, and immediately went to help his younger brother and sister. Henry was surprised by how quickly the family worked together, even after what they had been through. The train whistle sounded again, much closer this time. Henry could feel a tiny shake in the ground under his boots. "There's a ditch about 100 yards from here," Seamus said, pointing north. "We can hide there until the train passes." Henry looked at his horse Belle, then back at the family. He could put one child on Belle and maybe help another, but that still left too many people to move quickly. "I'll carry the little one," Henry said, reaching for the blonde girl. She looked scared but didn't cry. Vivian picked up another child, while Seamus helped the two older ones. They started moving away from the tracks as fast as they could, but it wasn't fast enough. The smallest boy was limping, and the little girl in Henry's arms felt hot with fever. "Faster," Vivian urged. But Henry could see everyone was already doing their best. The train whistle screamed again, and now Henry could see a black dot on the horizon growing bigger. The ground shook more with each second. They reached the ditch just as the huge engine roared past, pulling dozens of cars behind it. The noise was so loud that Henry couldn't hear anything else. Steam and smoke filled the air, and for a moment, he couldn't see the family around him. When the train finally passed, and the noise faded, Henry found himself sitting in the muddy ditch with 6 strangers who had almost died. The little girl in his arms was shivering, and Vivian looked like she might faint. "We made it," Seamus said, but his voice didn't sound happy. "Now what do we do?" That's when Henry heard the sound of horses approaching. 3 riders were coming toward them fast, and even from far away, Henry could tell they meant trouble. Vivian saw them too and grabbed Henry's arm. "It's Victor," she whispered. "My husband. He's come back to finish what he started." Lightning split the sky like God's own whip as Henry Stone fought against rope that seemed to mock his every effort. The oldest boy's wrists were raw from struggling, but his eyes held something Henry recognized, the look of someone who'd stopped believing rescue was possible. "What's your name, son?" Henry asked, sawing at the thick hemp with his hunting knife. "William," the boy whispered. "William O'Brien. That's my ma, Vivian, and my grandpa Seamus." Henry's blade finally cut through the last strand. William's arms dropped, and he immediately crawled toward his baby sister, whose fever had turned her cheeks bright red. The little one's breathing came in quick, shallow puffs that made Henry's chest tighten with worry. "How long have you been out here?" Henry helped free the twins, Samuel and Emma, who clung to each other like 2 halves of the same person. "Since midnight," Vivian answered, rubbing feeling back into her wrists. "Victor said we were too expensive to keep. Said the world would be better without mouths like ours to feed." The train's whistle echoed across the prairie, still distant, but growing stronger. Henry's pocket watch showed 6 minutes until 7 o'clock. His horse stamped nervously, sensing the approaching danger. "There's a dry creek bed about 200 yards north," Seamus said, lifting little Claire despite his own shaky legs. "We can hide there until the train passes." But as they stumbled toward safety, Henry noticed dark clouds building on the horizon. The wind had shifted, bringing with it the smell of rain and something else, something that made his skin crawl with unease. "Someone's coming," William said, pointing toward 3 riders moving fast across the grassland. Henry squinted through the growing darkness. The riders weren't heading toward the railroad tracks where they'd been tied. They were heading straight for the creek bed, as if they knew exactly where a family might try to hide. "He planned this," Vivian breathed, her face going white. "Victor planned all of this." The train whistle blew again, closer now. The riders were maybe 5 minutes away, and the storm clouds were rolling in like a black wall, promising to turn their hiding spot into a dangerous trap. Henry looked at the family huddled around him, a sick baby, exhausted children, an old man, and a mother who'd been betrayed by the one person who should have protected them all. Every smart instinct told him to mount his horse and ride away before the real trouble started. Instead, he checked his gun and counted his bullets. 6 shots, 3 riders, and a growing certainty that this night was about to test everything he thought he knew about right and wrong. "Stay close to me," he told them, as the first drops of rain began to fall. "And whatever happens, don't let go of each other." Rain poured down like the heavens had opened their floodgates, turning the dry creek bed into a rushing river of mud and danger. Henry pressed the O'Brien family against the rocky wall, trying to keep them above the rising water while watching the 3 riders grow larger against the storm-dark sky. Little Claire's fever spiked, and she began crying in thin, weak wails that cut through the thunder. Vivian rocked her daughter desperately, but the baby's skin felt like fire under her touch. "She needs medicine," Vivian said, tears mixing with rainwater on her cheeks. Real medicine, not just cool cloths and prayers. Town's 15 miles east, Seamus offered. But his voice held no hope. They all knew 15 miles might as well be 1,500, with riders hunting them and a storm trying to wash them away. The creek water swirled around their ankles now, cold and getting deeper by the minute. William and Lucy helped keep the twins steady, while Henry studied their options. The riders had stopped about a quarter-mile away, probably waiting for the storm to pass or the water to drive them out of hiding. "There," Samuel pointed with a shaking finger. "Is that a cave?" Henry followed the boy's gaze to what looked like a dark opening in the creek wall, maybe 30 feet upstream. It could be a cave, or it could be nothing more than shadows playing tricks in the lightning flashes. "I'll check it out," Henry said. But Seamus grabbed his arm. "Boy's got better eyes than either of us," the old man said. "And if those riders start shooting, we'll need you here with the gun." Before anyone could argue, William splashed through the knee-deep water toward the dark opening. Henry's heart hammered as the 12-year-old disappeared into what might be solid rock, or might be salvation. "It goes back about 10 feet, William's voice echoed from inside. "Dry ground, and there's something else." His words were cut off by a gunshot that cracked across the prairie like breaking bones. One of the riders had fired into the air, a signal that made Henry's blood run cold. "They're calling for help," Vivian whispered. "Victor probably has more men waiting in town." Henry lifted Claire from her mother's arms, feeling how light the baby had become. The little girl's eyes had gone glassy, and her breathing sounded like paper tearing. Without medicine soon, they might save her from drowning, only to lose her to fever. "Everyone into the cave," he ordered, helping Emma and Samuel through the rushing water. "Now!" As they squeezed into the rocky shelter, William's voice came from deeper inside. "You need to see this. There's a whole room back here, and supplies, like someone was planning to hide here." Lightning illuminated the cave mouth as Henry pulled Vivian and Claire inside. In that brief, white-hot moment, he saw the riders clearly for the first time. One of them wore a sheriff's badge that gleamed like a fallen star against his dark coat. The law was hunting them. Whatever Victor O'Brien had told the authorities, it had turned them from victims into criminals in the span of a single night. But in the deeper darkness of the cave, William had found something that might change everything if they lived long enough to use it. The earth shook beneath their feet as 3 horses thundered down the hillside like angry demons. Henry's heart hammered against his ribs as he recognized the lead rider, a well-dressed man with cold eyes who could only be Victor O'Brien, the monster who had tied his own family to those railroad tracks. "Well, well," Victor called out, his voice smooth as silk but sharp as broken glass. "Looks like someone's been meddling in my business." Henry stepped in front of Vivian and her children, his hand moving to rest on his gun handle. The 2 men riding with Victor spread out wide, making it impossible to watch them all at once. These weren't ordinary ranch hands. They moved like wolves, hungry and mean. "Your business?" Henry's voice came out steady despite the fear crawling up his spine. "Tying children to train tracks seems like the devil's business to me," Victor laughed, a sound that made little Claire whimper behind her mother's skirts. "Those children are mine to do with as I please, just like that worthless woman who bore them." From behind a large rock, old Seamus whispered urgently to his grandsons. "Samuel, Emma, when the shooting starts, you run for those trees and don't look back." The twins nodded, their young faces pale but determined. "You made a mistake coming back," Henry said, taking another step forward. "These folks are under my protection now." "Your protection?" Victor's eyes glittered with cruel amusement. "Do you know who I am, Cowboy? I own half the land in this territory. I have friends in high places. And you," he paused, looking Henry up and down like he was examining a bug, "you're nothing but a drifter, with holes in his boots." The words hit Henry like physical blows. How many times had he heard similar things? How many people had looked at him and seen only failure? But then Vivian stepped up beside him, her chin raised high despite her trembling hands. "He's worth 10 of you, Victor O'Brien. He saved us when you left us to die." "Touching," Victor sneered, "but foolish. Boys, I think it's time we taught our new friend here about interfering in family matters." The first gunman reached for his weapon, and Henry knew the moment of talking was over. Thunder rumbled overhead as dark clouds gathered, promising a storm that would wash the prairie clean of whatever happened next. Time slowed to a crawl as Henry watched the man's hand move toward his gun. Behind him, he could hear Vivian gathering her children close, whispering prayers he hoped someone was listening to. The wind picked up, sending dust swirling around them like tiny tornadoes. Everything Henry had ever been, every failure, every disappointment, every moment he'd been called worthless, came down to this single instant. Would he run like he always had before? Or would he finally stand and fight for something that mattered? His hand closed around his gun grip as the first raindrop struck his face. The gunfight exploded across the prairie, like lightning splitting the sky in two. Henry's first shot caught Victor's lead gunman in the shoulder, spinning him around like a child's top. The second gunman fired wild, his bullet whining past Henry's ear close enough to burn. Victor himself dove behind his horse, shouting orders that the wind snatched away. "Kill him! Kill them all!" But Henry had spent years hunting game to survive, and these hired killers were used to bullying farmers, not fighting men who knew how to shoot straight. His second bullet sent the remaining gunman running for the hills, clutching a wounded arm. "It's over, Victor," Henry called out, his smoking gun trained on the spot where the coward hid. "Come out and face what you've done." The storm chose that moment to break open like a dam bursting. Rain poured down in sheets, turning the dust to mud and making it hard to see more than a few feet. Lightning cracked overhead, followed by thunder that shook the ground. Victor emerged from behind his horse, but instead of surrendering, he held a small gun pointed straight at little Claire. "Drop your weapon, cowboy, or the baby dies," Vivian screamed, reaching for her daughter, but Victor was too far away. The child stood frozen in terror, rain streaming down her face like tears. "You're a monster," Henry said, but he slowly lowered his gun. He couldn't risk the little one's life, no matter what it cost him. "That's better." Victor's smile was nastier than a snake's bite. "You see, some people are worth saving, and some aren't. I've decided which category you fall into." But Victor had forgotten about old Seamus O'Brien, who had been moving quietly through the tall grass while everyone watched the standoff. The grandfather's walking stick cracked across Victor's wrist like a rifle shot, sending the gun flying into the mud. Henry moved faster than he ever had in his life, tackling Victor around the waist and driving him to the ground. They rolled and fought in the mud like wild animals, while Vivian scooped up Claire and the other children huddled together. "You're nothing," Victor snarled, throwing a punch that split Henry's lip. "You'll always be nothing." Henry caught Victor's wrist, stopping another blow inches from his face. For a moment, they strained against each other, rain washing the blood from their cuts. "Maybe I was nothing," Henry said through gritted teeth. "But these people make me something more." With a surge of strength he didn't know he had, Henry flipped Victor over and pinned him face down in the mud. The fight went out of the broken man all at once, leaving him sobbing like the coward he'd always been. When Henry finally stood up, he found 5 pairs of eyes watching him with something he'd never seen before: respect, gratitude, and maybe even love. The storm was already moving on, leaving the air clean and fresh. In the distance, a rainbow painted itself across the sky like a promise of better days ahead. Smoke rose from the chimney of the O'Brien homestead like a flag of victory against the October sky of 1879. Henry Stone wiped sweat from his brow as he hammered the last nail into the new barn wall, watching 10-year-old William practice roping fence posts with the determination of someone twice his age. The boy had asked endless questions about cowboy life, but today something different flickered in his eyes: worry. "Ma's been crying again," William whispered, glancing toward the cabin where Vivian hung laundry on the line. Her movements were sharp, angry, like she was fighting invisible enemies with each snap of wet fabric. Henry set down his hammer. 3 months had passed since the railroad tracks. 3 months of building this new life, piece by piece. But some wounds took longer to heal than others, and Vivian still jumped at unexpected sounds, still checked the horizon for riders who might never come. "She's scared Victor will find us," Lucy admitted, braiding wildflowers while 8-year-old wisdom poured from her lips. "I heard her talking to Grandpa Seamus about moving again, maybe to California where Cousin Patrick lives." The twins, Samuel and Emma, looked up from their game of marbles, their 6-year-old faces serious. Even little Claire, now walking and babbling in her own mysterious language, seemed to sense the tension that had settled over their small paradise, like morning frost. Henry watched Seamus emerge from the root cellar, his Irish face grim as stone. The old man had been different lately, checking his rifle more often, standing guard at the window when storms rolled through. Something was coming, and they all felt it in their bones. "Company's coming," Seamus called, pointing toward the distant dust cloud moving across the prairie. 3 riders approached at a steady pace, not hurried like trouble, but not casual like friends either. Vivian dropped her laundry basket, her face going white as milk. "No," she breathed. "Not yet. We're not ready." But Henry was already moving toward his horse, his hand checking his gun out of habit. The riders were still too far away to identify, but their purposeful approach sent ice through his veins. After months of peace, of believing they were safe, reality came thundering back across the grassland. "Take the children inside," he ordered, but his voice carried a calmness he didn't feel. Whatever was coming, whoever these riders were, the family he'd chosen to protect would not face it alone. William grabbed his little sister's hand, while Lucy herded the twins toward the cabin door. But as the riders drew closer, Henry saw something that made his stomach drop like a stone in deep water. The lead rider wore a sheriff's badge that caught the afternoon sun like a warning. "Sheriff Hayes, Wyoming Territory," the lead rider announced, dismounting with the careful movements of a man who'd seen too much trouble. His weathered face held no malice, but his eyes swept the homestead with professional interest, taking in every detail like he was reading a story written in wood and stone. Henry stepped forward, keeping his hands visible but ready. Behind him, he could hear Vivian's sharp intake of breath through the cabin window. The other 2 riders stayed mounted deputies by their badges, young men with nervous energy and quick hands. "We're looking for information about Victor O'Brien," Sheriff Hayes continued, his voice carrying across the yard like distant thunder. "Word is his wife and children might be in these parts." "Might be," Henry replied carefully. "Depends on what you want with them." The sheriff's eyes narrowed, studying Henry's face with the intensity of a man reading wanted posters. "You'd be Henry Stone, I reckon. Used to work the Lazy J Ranch before it went under. Got a reputation for being handy with that Colt." This wasn't the conversation Henry had expected. He felt the pieces of some larger puzzle shifting around him, but couldn't see the whole picture yet. News travels fast out here. Faster when there's money involved. Sheriff Hayes pulled a folded paper from his vest pocket, but kept it closed. "Victor O'Brien's been asking questions in Cheyenne, offering rewards for information about his missing family. Claims they were kidnapped." The cabin door creaked open, and Vivian emerged with little Claire on her hip, her chin raised in defiance, despite the fear in her eyes. "I wasn't kidnapped, Sheriff. I ran for our lives." "So I gathered." Hayes unfolded the paper, not a wanted poster, but a telegram. "Got this from the territorial marshal yesterday. Seems Victor O'Brien won't be asking any more questions about anything." Henry felt the world shift beneath his feet. "What do you mean?" "Means he got himself shot dead in a poker game 3 nights ago. Cheating at cards, they say." The sheriff's voice held no emotion, just facts, delivered like weather reports. "Funny thing, though, seems he owed money to half of Cheyenne, and had warrants out in 2 other territories." Vivian sank onto the porch steps, clutching Claire so tight the little girl squirmed in protest. Tears streamed down her face, but Henry couldn't tell if they were from relief or grief or something else entirely. "There's more," Sheriff Hayes continued, and his voice got softer, kinder. "Seems Victor had a life insurance policy. Big one. Company's looking for his legal widow to collect." He handed the telegram to Vivian. "That'd be you, Mrs. O'Brien. $5,000, waiting in the Cheyenne Bank." The number hung in the air like a miracle. $5,000 was more money than any of them had ever imagined. Enough to secure their future forever. But Henry saw something else in Vivian's face, a look of someone finally, truly free. "We can rebuild anywhere we want," she whispered, looking at Henry with eyes that held tomorrow's possibilities. "Start fresh, all of us together." Sheriff Hayes tipped his hat and remounted his horse. "Congratulations on your good fortune, folks. And Mr. Stone?" He paused, meeting Henry's eyes one last time. "Territory could use a good man with your skills. Deputy positions open in Cedar Falls if you're interested." As the lawman rode away, Henry stood surrounded by the family he'd chosen and who had chosen him back. The afternoon sun painted everything golden, the cabin, the children playing in the yard, and Vivian's face as she smiled at him with love and hope and the promise of all the tomorrows they'd build together. Sometimes worth came disguised as tragedy, and freedom looked like the end of everything you'd feared.